Recently, I began considering my family roots. Among its curiosities were the stories I'd heard as a child. My grandparents immigrated from a town called Caropepe and settled in my hometown of Rochester, New York. For many years, I thought they were saying Carlo and Pepe. One of my cousins told me it meant the village of Carlo and Pepe. Well, anecdotes like that were good for a laugh, and they were good enough for a long time. But once I began to take a serious interest in my roots, they felt soft. I wanted a better sense of who we were and where we had come from. I'd grown up with some of the atmosphere of the old country, the primal aroma of frying meatballs, the smothering embraces of old relatives, whispers of incidents with pistols, funny traditions like the seven fishes on Christmas Eve. But really, it was an American childhood. There is almost no information about how it all began. We knew some about the generation that had immigrated at the start of the 20th century as children, but they never really spoke of the old country. It wasn't clear as to where in Sicily the family had hailed from. I thought Carlo and Pepe. Excuse me. Having done a good deal of research in my time, I knew that the family root business was filled with vagueness and generally lacking in eureka moments. I cautioned myself that tracking ancestors would be a crapshoot. So my initial objective was modest, to trace a path backwards from Rochester, New York to Sicily. Maybe it was good to set the bar low because it didn't take long to get results. Some relatives said they thought our roots were in a town near Caltanissetta or Mazzarino or even Ragusa. My father's first cousin, Sally Arena, her father was my grandmother's little brother, confirmed that the ancestral home was, in fact, in Valguanera. I did an internet search of Arenas, our grandmother's maiden name, in Sicily. A village called Valguanera Caropepe was among those with the biggest number of hits. I then borrowed a copy and read the family history my cousin A.J. Ciulla had written several years ago about when our relatives came to this country. Cousin Andy's story confirmed a very important fact. Antonio Incardona, my grandmother's brother-in-law, saved his widowed mother-in-law, Rosario Marata Arena, and her three small children, Mary, Francesca, and Sam, from a certain death by bringing them to America. Without his generosity, my grandmother would have starved to death. My dad and me and the rest of us would have never existed. The hero in our family story is Antonino Incardona. By now my interest was piqued. A more substantial plan began to take shape, one that involved airplanes. We put the word out to our arena cousins, and Tony Incardona from Phoenix, Arizona decided to join us. I dreamt of going to Sicily, but I had no intention of trying to do the whole island. The plan was that the contingent of our family would stay in one place, we'd relax, eat good food, and give ourselves some sense of the island's dizzying history. We'd be exploring our arena family background, but again, in a limited, roundabout way. As for Valguanera Caropepe, some of our family members over the years had visited this town, either as part of a tour that breezed through the village, or they arrived with an idea that they could just show up and poke around. In either case, none of them were successful in unearthing any real information about our ancestors. Or if they did, they didn't share any of this information with their extended family. Since we didn't speak Italian and didn't want to drive a car on unfamiliar roads, we needed a guide who was adept at research, was English speaking, could provide transportation for us, and was able to put together a custom family roots tour. Well, the heavens smiled upon us, and we were blessed with Giovanni Vallone. Giovanni is a very famous writer-journalist, which in 2012 was awarded the Gambrinus renowned literary prize for his last book, The Guide of Etna. Can you believe our incredible good fortune to have this amazing writer who has a PhD in natural history and is director of the not-for-profit organization Il Consulate agree to take us on this journey? Such an honor. If you want to visit Sicily, contact Giovanni and ask him to make all the plans for you. He will design a custom tour. He can provide accommodations, either stay in a villa the whole time, make arrangements with local hotels. And by the way, his wife, Giovanni's wife, is a famous Sicilian chef. She can cook for you or teach you how to cook. How can it get better than that? So go with Giovanni or the wonderful people he knows into the villages and embrace the culture. It will change your life. You just can't feel Sicily on a commercial tour, and Sicily needs to be felt, not just seen. We were booked in to the Romano Palace Hotel in Catania, a beautiful property with excellent customer service. Catania, Enna, and Caropepe were all super clean. The restaurants, hotels, and even the streets, so clean. It's embarrassing to admit that I had never thought of Sicily as a tropical island. I thought of it as the old country. Since the town our relatives came from is high in the mountains, the tropical nature just escaped me. Catania was warm and humid. The no-see-ums come out around 5 p.m. like Florida. There's seafood everywhere, and you can even smell the sea air. Catania Center is such a nice town. It has everything: historic buildings, churches, cafes, and boutique shopping. After the long flight from the States, I escaped to the bar to check out the beautifully decorated room. Arab-inspired mosaic and decor punctuated the exotic feeling of Sicily. It was really something. The next day, Cousin Tony and I checked out Saturday's outdoor market in Catania. The market in Catania is massive and thriving. Residents of the city come out to buy groceries for the week. We saw many fruits and vegetables that were new to us. All you have to do is view the photograph of my cousin Tony to see how happy he looks. Sicily does that to a person. The sunshine, the beauty of the city, and how very nice everyone is. We asked directions from strangers and they stopped what they were doing, left their shops to direct us to taxis. What a change from the snarky people we encounter in our hometowns. How could you not be happy surrounded by such beauty? We had a blast in Catania. We had such contentment just sitting at the Cafe del Duomo next to the elephant sculpture in the Catania Center, just watching people. We were slowing our pace down, relaxing in a way neither of us recalled ever feeling, and a peace washed over us. We just allowed time to escape. The waiter brought us 2 kinds of aranciati, one with meat and one with melted Asiago cheese centers. I think we may have had a gelato or shared a pastry, but I can't recall. Over strong cups of coffee that never made us nervous, we were transformed into natives, blending into the environment, becoming one with the people around us. It felt great. We saw a wedding party outside a church that we walked by down the street, and a bit later, that same bride and groom walked the entire town square. This, I understand, is an Italian tradition, which I probably can't pronounce correctly, but I think they say passeggiata. How's that? A gentle stroll through the historic town square. Really lovely. Just one of the many things we found that were heartfelt and special about Sicily. And such a beautiful couple. It was such a fun day. I bought a souvenir from myself, a tiny 6-inch wooden Sicilian cart. It's sitting on my desk right now in front of me. That little $4 well, I should say €4 trinket is now one of my favorite possessions. When I look at it and am transported back to the moment when I started to fall in love with Sicily. Sunday evening was the first event Giovanni had planned for us. We took the hotel shuttle into Catania Center to attend Mass at St. Agatha's Cathedral. My beloved Aunt Ida died last year. She left me a little bit of money, and I thought she would like it if I were to use that money to visit the homeland of her parents, whom she missed so much. At the cathedral bearing her name, St. Agatha, I lit a candle for my aunt, and also for my father, who sadly had passed a few weeks after she did. 2013 was a very difficult and sad year for me. 2014 has been the opposite. You just have to hang in there, get the negative out of your life, and seek happiness. Sunday Mass in Sicily is exactly the same as it is in the States. Except, of course, it's in Italian. The kneelers are not padded. They're very uncomfortable. The collection basket is different. And oddly enough, they refer to Jesus as Signor. I still don't get that, and each time the priest said Signor, I almost laughed. Mass was pretty fast. My dad would have loved that. The priest was very passionate about whatever he was talking about and kept the sermon short. Bravo! Our driver, Luca, met us in the square after Mass. Now, this is a funny story, because I thought Giovanni said Luca would be wearing a white shirt and that he had a bird face. At the time, I thought, how rude to describe someone that way. But Italians can have large beaks. Many of my relatives have large noses. So Tony located Luca, and we loved him right away. He's a handsome young man with a great smile, bright spirit, whose English was pretty good. And believe it or not, his nose was quite small. He explained that he was in his final year of dermatology school as Luca drove us to Mama Lavina's apartment. Later, when I sought clarification from Giovanni, I had to laugh that he was saying Luca had a beard on his face and that he subsequently had forgotten to wear the white shirt. Not a bird face. Giovanni had made arrangements for us to experience the real Sicily in the home of a Sicilian grandmother for Sunday dinner. How totally cool is that? This was the perfect beginning of a very special journey for us. In her home on Via Monfalcone, the most renowned street in Catania, Mama Lavina, coincidentally enough, Giovanni's mother, prepared the most delicious meal for us. The Signora was helped by a couple of nice people and prepared a very elegant table. We had wonderful culinary experiences in Sicily, but Mama Lavina's food was without a doubt the best we ate in the entire time we were there. The pasta alla norma was delicious. She made 2 kinds of ricotta cheese, green olives that had no bite to them, but rather were uniquely mellow, and a campanata that was superior. I can't stop thinking about it. There was a fish course prepared 2 ways, antipasto with seasonal fried vegetables, a closed kind of pizza with broccoli, homemade sweets, and the lightest cannoli shell with the freshest ricotta cheese ever. There was wine and coffee, and water, and just too many items to mention. Without being vulgar, by the time dinner was over, I felt completely sated. We just made it back to the Romano Palace Hotel before a food-induced coma hit us like a tsunami. We were lulled into a stupor as we retreated into the lush outdoor seating off the bar to sip an after-dinner liqueur and try and get our heads around the completely amazing experience we had just had. Tony and I had been embraced by Sicily. It had a firm hold on our hearts and soul. The next morning, we checked out of the Romano Palace Hotel. Luca and his cousin Salvo picked us up and drove us to the Sicilia Outlet Village Mall. It's around 20 minutes from Enna. I drove with Salvo because Luca drives like a race car driver or a New York City taxi driver and scared the crap out of me. What can I say? This outlet mall is awesome. Over 100 shops of the highest designer brands. We spent a fair amount of time in the Gucci outlet. Breathe in, hold it, slowly exhale. It was shopping heaven. Tony, Luca, and Salvo hung out at the cafe while Nancy and I shopped. It was a pretty hot day and the mall is in the middle of nowhere and got direct sunshine. After a couple hours, I went out and got the guys so we could have lunch at Fudsud, kind of a sandwich place. But like all the food in Sicily, it was good. Then it was off to Enna. As we moved towards Enna, it began to seem more remote. But remote is good. Even if it wasn't focused, this trip had purpose, which had little to do with standard issue tourism. With such a base, we had the feeling of being in the real Sicily, far from coastal resorts, in this sparsely populated interior, among the cicadas and the olive trees and the baked earth. Nothing about the inland Sicily feels truly Italian. There's not enough hustle and bustle and chatter. As you reach the very center of the country, a small city appears on the hilltop plateau overlooking the valley. This is Enna, the highest regional capital in Sicily, also known as Belvedere, beautiful view, or L'Ombelico, the navel of Sicily. Arriving at gorgeous Federico Palace and Enna, we said our goodbyes to Luca and Salvo before calling it a day. We were so exhausted we had to cancel our dinner reservations and go right to bed. The next morning, Giovanni came for us. His excitement was hardly contained, yet he didn't want to ruin the surprise by telling us anything. We didn't know what to expect. It all seemed very mysterious, and we probably would have been more anxious, but Giovanni's enthusiasm and excitement was contagious. Enna's ranges like a serpent along the mountain ridge. Snaking up the mountain, I could see Enna stretched across the hilltop. Everywhere you look is another ancient site, remains of a town that had been colonized or conquered by Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Normans, Spaniards, and others. Archaeological and anthropological opportunities ooze from every pore of this mountain village. Valguanera dates back to the prehistoric period. In 1200 BC, it was called Carapipa. During the Roman period, which I can't pronounce, then popularized in Caropepe, until 1626 there were two Caropepes. Caropepe Soprano, which means upper, the highest part of Valguanera, the one we visited via Sebarina, and Caropepe Sata, the lower part of the city. When in 1626 the Prince Francesco Valguanera del Cerreto united them and gave the name of Valguanero Caropepe. Since then, since 1626, it has been called Valguanera Caropepe. But of course, the purpose of this trip was to see where our parental grandparents had come from. Just then, Giovanni turned off the main road into a somewhat overgrown area. That's when I saw the word Floristella. My heart started pounding. In 1876, about 30% of sulfur workers were children, ages 7 to 15 of age. These children were called Carusi, which means boys in the Sicilian dialect. The Carusi carried the sulfur from the tunnels, working 8 to 10 hours per day. The Carusis were rented by the miners from the boys' parents to work in the mines for a fixed period of time. The miners worked for the mine owner, and the Carusis worked for the miner. The Carusi and the miners worked naked or semi-naked because of the extremely hot temperatures in the mine. Our grandfather, Vincenzo Arena, started his mining career as a Carusi at age 6. I had read about Floristella, and this quote stuck in my mind. The conditions in the conditions in Sicilian sulfur mines were so horrific, prompting Booker T. Washington to write, I am not prepared just now to say to what extent I believe in a physical hell in the next world, but a sulfur mine in Sicily is about the nearest thing to hell that I expect to see in this life. Papa Vincenzo, as we refer to him, worked in the Floristella mines all his life. When Grandma Sarita married him, she insisted he take her to the mine and show her where he worked. Upon seeing the deplorable working conditions in the mine, she told him that no child of hers would ever work in that mine, and they never did. Giovanni was explaining a bit about the mine and the abuse the children that worked there endured. I was trying to imagine little boys having to go into those dark, hot caves and exert their little bodies more than their capabilities. It sickened me. I was thinking of Auschwitz and slavery and all those horrific examples of children being forced and owned. Giovanni was driving very slowly, and he glanced over his shoulder, looked me in the eyes, and simply said, and sexual abuse. A penny dropped somewhere in my head and rattled around loudly. That had never occurred to me. It wasn't written in any of our histories that I had read about Floristella. As if their existence wasn't horrific enough, they were being sexually abused. We gasped. I had to catch my breath. The realization was overwhelming. And then we have a family joke. In our family, we've always had it. We call him Papa Vincenzo, referring to his alcoholism. I'm sure his drinking was a result of the pain he endured as a child. I mean, during what could have only have been a horrific life. We stopped to get out and take photos, and you could almost feel the pain in the air, hanging there, a ghost from long ago. The plants below the mine are called Floristella, and that's where the mine got its name from. When we were leaving Floristella, Giovanni pointed out the church that was on the mine's property. It was the church for the mine. How appalling. These deeply religious Catholic people, without question, the Catholic Church had the power to prevent this abuse from happening. I was deeply affected by seeing that church. As a Catholic, I'm horrified. Giovanni got a call and said, we have to go. They're waiting for us in town. All of a sudden, everything was changing. We didn't know what to expect as he raced towards our grandmother's hometown. My ancestral town turned out to be a sweet, psalmist, pleasant place. Its roots are deep. Traditions and architectural remains date to the Middle Ages, and its earliest settlement may have been in the 3rd century BC. Current population today is around 8,000 residents. Most of the town's people who left at the turn of the century immigrated to 3 places: Venezuela, Canada, and the United States. Most of those who went to America seem to have gone to New York. We pulled up in front of a building where a couple young men stood. They exchanged greetings in Sicilian with Giovanni, and we were hustled through an office to a back room. One look at the ancient ledgers and I knew where we were. We were at City Hall. Giovanni introduced us to Giuseppe Profeta, the vice mayor, Gaetano Bonanno, the city manager, Paolo Totobellone, owner of 2 museums, and Laura Diaglo, Gaetano's girlfriend, who also works at the city office and is a very cool girl. Wonderful people. Giovanni then presented me with a copy of my grandmother's birth certificate. He had done a good bit of research, including finding the birth certificates of both of our grandmothers, along with Antonino and Cardona. It was so emotional to see my grandmother's name handwritten in that ancient ledger. I burst into tears. It had been an emotional day already, and here it wasn't even noon. First Floristella, and then seeing our grandmother's names handwritten in ancient ledgers. This was our history, where we came from, the horrific struggle for survival, the marks it left on them, and the absolute joy in knowing we were home. We had come back healthy and educated. We had survived. Now we were home again. We belonged here, and we felt it. We felt Sicilian. Quickly finishing our beverages that we drank at the bar across the street from City Hall, we trailed after Giovanni, who was anxious to show us something else. Giovanni has more going on in his brain at any one time than 100 people. It's impossible to keep up with him. As we stepped outside the bar, the mayor, Sebastiano Salvatore Lienza, was leaving his office. He made his way across the main street to greet us. Giovanni made the introductions, and he greeted us warmly. Now, how many times in your life does a mayor cross the street to shake your hand? It was so gracious of him. We were honored. Then Giovanni began walking, fast. He had something to show us as we rushed to keep up with him. We climbed a steep hill that had streets running to the left and right of the road that we walked on. At the top of the hill, he pointed to a street sign that had the name Arena on it. According to Gaetano, the mayor of Caropipi for several years had been an arena, one of my relatives perhaps. The next sign I saw was Morota or Morada. That was our Grandma Sarita's maiden name. Giovanni came to a stop in front of a century-old stucco apartment. It hadn't been hard to find, he said, for the address was right there on the birth certificate. This building was where my grandmother was born. It was the home of Francesca, Mary, and Sam Arena, who after immigrating to Rochester, New York, gave rise to the world into which we were born. This is where my grandmother was born and where she lived until coming to America at age 7. At once, my grandmother had been brought to life again. Hard to describe so many emotions. They choke me even now. A poster on the apartment wall with the name of a different Francesca who had passed away reminded me that my Francesca was also passed. There are posters plastered outside apartment doors that looked religious in nature, bearing the names of individuals. I asked Giovanni what they were. He explained that when a loved one dies, the spouse will have that posted on their house. They also often have a brass plaque permanently installed by the near the front door. In the photos I have, the sign says "Per il mio caro sposo." Please forgive my Italian. Giovanni pointed out the plaque, and he said it translated to "my dear husband." How different grief is in Sicily. When you love your spouse, you should be able to hang a sign on your house announcing to the world, "My husband died. I loved him. I love him still. I'll love him always." Sicilians are people who feel deeply and love deeply. I had lost my husband too. We then headed for lunch at Osteria alla Canale in Valguanera. The very warm welcome we received from Chef Leo and Giuseppe, the feast of delicious local food and wine that they prepared, we consumed with great enthusiasm. There's no menu here. The chef sent out appetizer after appetizer, followed by bowls of pasta alla norma and awesome pastries. This meal is beyond description, but it will be memorable to my dying day. It began to dawn on me that my family culture, the loudness, the physicality, the jokes, the food, the immediate familiarity towards others was maybe not so much Italian as specifically Sicilian. And the origins were here, right here. It all felt bewilderingly and unexpectedly familiar. Oh, did I mention that Giovanni, Gaetano, Giuseppe, Paolo, and Roberto joined us for lunch? It lasted around 4 hours. At one point, Roberto jokingly said to the waiter, "If you bring out one more appetizer, I will kill you." It was very funny, as he was echoing the sentiments of all of us. At some point, I remembered the gift I had brought from America for the chef and went into the kitchen to present it to him. His kitchen was spotless. Chef Lilo is huge for a Sicilian, well over 6 feet and solid muscle. He spoke very little English, and I speak very little Sicilian, but somehow we had the best time. He made me laugh and linked our arms to drink our wine. I'm not much of a drinker, but I had 2 glasses of red wine, and then the chef brought out a green liqueur in a ceramic bottle that I think may have been homemade Strega. Regardless of what it was, it left me feeling a little drunk. We walked through town after that, and Giovanni pointed out a church our grandparents had been baptized in. It was closed at the time, so we couldn't go in. We walked to Paolo's museum, which he opened up for us and introduced us to his father, younger brother, and uncle. I'd always wondered how Grandma Sarita, with 3 small children, was able to get from Valguanera to Palermo to board the ship to America. It seemed unlikely they could have walked the distance. Paolo indicated the photo of a train that they had boarded at the base of the mountain, which brought them to the ship. Giovanni explained that the train and the impact it had on the life of the people in Valguanera, who had formerly had to walk or use a donkey. The next photo I saw looked familiar. When I spotted Josephina Ciulla in a red dress, who is married to my father's first cousin, Angelo. We call her Peppina. Sadly, she passed away a few years ago. Her husband, Angelo, is still alive at 87, and his son, Tony, lives a couple blocks from me and is a vice president at a manufacturing company here in Penfield, New York. Imagine finding your cousin in a museum some 8,000 miles from home. Ah, but that was the reminder, wasn't it? This was also our home. The large photograph of the Amalfi family of butchers surprised me. Their family has had a meat market in Rochester, New York for generations, and I'm acquainted with several members of their family. Giovanni returned us to our Enna hotel after a long emotional day. He said goodbye before I realized we wouldn't be seeing him again. If I had known that this was the last time I would see him, I would have exchanged kisses and hugs with him and thanked him as profusely as I could in my bumbling Italian. The expectation of what we would find in Sicily were so far surpassed that it's almost impossible to put into words. This began as a family roots research trip and ended up touching our souls and melting our hearts. This generous man and his love for Sicily took us on a journey that brought us home. We adore you. Thank you. Thank you, Giovanni. The next afternoon, around 3 p.m., Paolo picked us up and brought us back to the village. As we walked along, we passed a man on the street. Paolo explained we were visiting from Rochester, New York. The man said, "Rochester, New York? Do you know Dr. Giangreco?" We couldn't believe it. Dr. Giangreco is our dentist. The man who directed us to the correct door was his cousin. We had arrived at an apartment of the only Arena family relative in the town of Valguanera, Samuel Arena. Blue eyes, space between his teeth, a smile like the entire Arena family. His mother, though only an Arena by marriage, was very excited to meet us. They welcomed us into their lovely home. Coffee and sweets appeared with an apology that if they had had more notice, they would have prepared a feast. Our immediate family in Rochester isn't that hospitable. I have to mention the cookies that Samuel Arena's wife brought out. They were incredible. Tony ate 3. As I wrestled for self-control, my eyes kept going back to those cookies. What the heck were they? She was a sweetheart, too. A cheerful, kind woman that I would like to have as a friend. I'd also like her cookie recipe. When we left, Tony said, "Those were the best cookies." And I had a laugh. Here we just met our only little living relative in a remote village in Sicily, and both of us were distracted by the cookies. Well, they were really good cookies. With kisses and genuine hugs to our Arena cousins, we were on our way, following Paolo to God knows where. No pun intended. Just a few steps away from our Arena cousins' home is, I can't say this, Cisa Parochial San Giuseppe, the Church of St. Joseph. We entered the church and women were praying. There were no men in there. They were saying the rosary and praying to an altar on the side of the church. I wasn't sure what was going on, as Paolo motioned for us to wait as he disappeared through a doorway. A few minutes later, he emerged and motioned us to follow him. We ended up in the priest's office. We were told to take a seat and wait while he concluded business with a parishioner that had apparently been there before us. My cousin, Father Salvatore Ciulla, and we bear a distinct resemblance, our eyes and especially our mouth, but most of all our personality. This is a very cool guy who reminded me of my dad. He was definitely a lot of fun. He threw a vestment over his jeans and denim shirt, and in a few minutes he was saying Mass for the Ciulla and Cardona family. I was floored. Thank you, Father Ciulla and Paolo. Giovanni, how did you arrange this? Father Ciulla couldn't have been nicer. He gave my cousins and me rosary beads and a plaque from his church. Paolo's girlfriend, Serena Ferrara, a lovely, vivacious girl with quick wit and common sense, arrived to join us for Mass. Afterwards, we followed them to Paolo's car and we were off to our next destination. I should have guessed it was Paolo's second museum. This guy is amazing and he's only 24. It's not every day you get to see Benito Mussolini's uniform. I'm not sure how I feel about the fascist room. Was I shocked when I first entered? Guess it's good for a museum to have surprises and get reactions from people viewing it. Still, it was unnerving and I didn't really understand how he came by all this stuff. Later, he explained that the House Museum illustrates the history of the local, personal, and social change using a language that is understandable to all, the language of life, through an exhibition in which various objects become subjects of communication, alive and active, as they have been over time. The House Museum was inaugurated on March 22, 2014. The house, in the medieval period, was a control tower of the street leading to Piazza Amarina. The uniforms of the fascist period, 1934, that he found in the house... the uniform of the fascist period, 1934, he found in the house when he bought it. That's how he came by it. I had been curious about the images I had seen over the years depicting Sicily's peasants as gypsies. I had asked Giovanni, and he seemed to know what I meant about the native dress. He asked Paolo something, and I gathered they sort of agreed. Paolo provided clarification. Sicilians are not gypsies. There is a nomadic group from the area of Noto near Syracuse called I can't say it, Sicilians. Gee, I wish I could speak. They have historically practiced a nomadic season linked to the profession of the knife and umbrella maker. However, nowadays, more and more sedentary walkers are just traveling around Syracuse as descendants of the Rom arrived on the island around the 14th century. Heritage of traditional Sicilian costumes today has almost completely disappeared. The history of the most traditional Sicilian costume for female consists of a skirt of linen or cotton or lame in color called a fadetta or a fadetta. The costumes of the men can be divided into categories, the daily and holiday. The garment is more primitive than that of the shepherd. When we were touring the museum, we ran into Gaetano and Laura from City Hall, Paolo's father, his uncle, and some other people we had met earlier. It was pretty incredible. They treated us like old friends. It seemed like we were at a party. That's one of the special things about Caropepe. We never felt like outsiders or uncomfortable. They made sure that we felt like we belonged. Paolo brought us back to the church that was closed the day before. He went in the back office and spoke to the priest who agreed to turn the lights on and let us take photographs. From the outside, you never would guess that this would be an incredibly beautiful church inside. This church, I'm just going to say the Church of St. Christopher, because I can't pronounce this whole name, is the church of our grandparents. This church has either the oldest pipe organ in all of Sicily or in all of Italy, or the largest. Boy, I need to learn to speak Italian, don't I? We saw the baptismal font where our arena grandparents were baptized. How incredible is that? My Grandma Ciulla was christened right there. I just can't get over it that it still stands. She would be around 130 years old today, and the baptismal font is still there. As we were walking down the street past some shops that were closed, and Tony said he wished he could find a silver cross, Paolo made a call, and in seconds a woman pulled up in her car, jumped out, opened her store, turned off the security system, and sold us jewelry. It was unique, if not a surreal experience. I got a very cool charm of Sicily with a mark on it where Valguanera is located. I love that. After we made our purchases, we were all really hungry and kind of tired. Paolo directed us to Corte de Bacco, a wonderful pizzeria and bar. We had the best pizza ever. I don't even like pizza. I probably only have it once or twice a year. But this pizza was not greasy. It had a crispy crust, beautiful fresh toppings, so good. Paolo and Serena ordered a pizza that came with French fries on it. I never saw that before. This was a great night. Oh, something else. Grandma always made thick pizza that was like bread, with just a little bit of sauce and grated cheese and anchovies pushed in the dough. We always thought that was Sicilian pizza, or what we called wedding pizza. I saw that same pizza in Sicily, and they just call it focaccia. It was after 11, and the dark Sicilian night felt luxuriant when Paolo and Serena brought us to the highest point in Enna to see the lights of the city. We were sad to say goodbye to Paolo and Serena, but we were beyond exhausted. Then the next day, as we checked out of the Federico Palace, Luca and Salvo pulled up to drive us to Catania's airport. It hit us around the same time that we were leaving Valguanera, and we were not ready to leave at all. We got choked up making our goodbyes to those guys. If we had known how we would feel about being in Valguanera, we would have stayed longer. Giovanni made us fall in love with Sicily and made us feel as if it was our home to which we will return again.